When we talk about the threat landscape today, it goes hand in hand with speed. Like we can't actually decouple those. And that's really whether we're talking about a cyber criminal or a nation state actor. In the recent Unit 42 IR report that was released, we actually showed a 4-time increase in the speed of action from the attacker. And so that was for data exfiltration down from 5 hours in the year prior to now 72 minutes that we saw in cases where attackers were able to move laterally through an environment and then exfiltrate data. What that means when you're talking to an executive is seconds and minutes count. We are now operating at a speed of attack that, quite frankly, we can't rely on human analytical speed to counter it. It's not possible anymore. And let me share some numbers that probably are going to be a bit staggering, but also show that it's not only speed that we need, but it's scale of detection that is absolutely critical. And this is why human defenses alone, operating at manual speed, just simply don't work anymore. For example, at Palo Alto Networks, we identify almost 31 billion new attacks per day. So these are attacks that come into our environment that our teams are defending against. Out of those, 8.9 million are new novel attack patterns that we haven't seen even the day before. With automation and with a bunch of integration from an AI perspective into our SOC capabilities, we are able to drill that down to one manual attack that we are using humans to respond to every day. So you can see that top of the funnel is huge. It goes a bit smaller and then it goes to an incredibly small, actually achievable number because we're using automation. When we talk about the threat landscape, speed is such a critical factor, and we need to be able to use AI capabilities or machine capabilities in order to be successful. Another example of time is that in our own Unit 42 research labs, we simulate a lot of attack patterns so that we can identify them when they're new and we may not have seen them elsewhere. And what we have been able to simulate is that from the initial infiltration vector or that initial access to an environment, within 25 minutes, we've been able to get into an environment, move laterally, get to the data we're interested in, and steal it from an environment. If we're now talking about 25 minutes, you can see that there's no way we can use manual defenses to detect at that speed and be successful against an attacker who is coordinated, resourced, and quite frankly, really smart. At Unit 42, when we're evaluating the threat landscape at the highest, most fundamental level, we're looking at two categories of attackers. One being a nation state attacker, and the second being a cyber criminal. When we look at nation state actors, we're typically looking at China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, having a variety of capabilities, but sharing most of the time very similar intent. And that intent is usually to go into an environment and steal data related to learning some political objective, or that data that's tied to analysis that can be used to achieve a political objective. So that could be a typhoon actor going into a telecommunications organization and stealing data related to what types of communications are flowing. It could be a nation state actor who's going into a police department's counterterrorism division and stealing data related to how they train their workforce, or maybe how they identify threats, to then understand how can we build capabilities either within our own organization and country, or how can we build capabilities to evade their detections. One of the areas that's becoming a bit more blurred is there are nation state actors who are actually using attacks to steal money. North Korea, for example, embedding employees into organizations throughout the world with the intent to bring money back to their country is one example of that. And there are certainly organizations where we're seeing nation state actors who are using contractors to conduct activity that then starts now blurring some of the lines between cybercriminal and nation state objectives. And in some cases, those are becoming harder to define or just converging a lot more. When we talk about cyber criminal actors, what we're usually referring to is a threat actor who wants to make money or generate some sort of profit from an attack. Whether that's them coming into an organization and encrypting data to then command a ransomware payment on the back end, or whether that's more of what we're seeing today, which is this idea that I'm going to go into an environment, I'm going to steal data from it. I might also encrypt it, but I'm certainly going to look to extort the organization on the back end. I'm likely looking to cause some sort of disruption that may increase their likelihood to provide me payment to stop the pain. All of these types of activities are going on, and an organization who's a top tier target, a financial services company, a government organization, a healthcare organization, they are likely dealing with attackers coming from every single one of these angles and needing to be able to prioritize defenses so that they can quickly detect, respond, contain, and mitigate these problems as fast as possible. I would say one of the challenges that we're dealing with when we look at the threat landscape today is what I would call an identity crisis. And identity and the compromise of it is not a new concept for attackers. But the reality is, we have such a complex amount of identities. And now, if we look at AI and the creation of synthetic identities, which today in the average enterprise, synthetic identities are outnumbering human identities at a ratio of 80 to 1. When we have the same conversation next year, I cannot even imagine how big that number is going to be. And so now, if you think about an attacker's perspective, this is like a great playground for them because they're like, hey, great, now I can capture even more identities and use them to my advantage. And if we look at the mindset and the psyche of an attacker, and I've mentioned that many of them operate from a very professional business mindset these days, they think about what's the easiest, most efficient way that I can get the job done. And that's oftentimes not to break in from the outside. It's typically to log in using a valid credential that's maybe been compromised somewhere else. It's been sold on the internet. And now I'm going to use that to log in. And ideally, if I'm an attacker, I want to go undetected in your environment for as long as possible so that I can keep conducting my operations. I can achieve the objectives, whether that's stealing data or making money. I want to do that for as long as possible while you don't know I'm there. Let's talk about some actions that organizations can take to harden their environment against those type of identity issues. The first concept is eliminating standing privileges, not having accounts and credentials that are valid at all times, that once an attacker captures, they can just use them at any time they want. We really want to enforce a just in time concept so that if an attacker gets access to these credentials, they have a very short window of time that they can use them and be successful because maybe they're procured in a check in and check out type of manner. And when you see one of those credentials being used, you've got all eyes on deck at this point. You know that, hey, this is a very specific circumstance. This is special. We need to make sure we know exactly why and when these credentials are being used. And in order to allow yourself to be more successful, you want to have those time limited and not have them available at any time. Another concept is strengthening privileged access governance. That means we're going to make it a bit more complicated for your administrator, but ideally for that attacker to actually use the most privileged credentials you have in your environment. Ideally, you have a multi-account approval process for that type of access so that, again, when those credentials are used that can conduct the most sensitive actions within your environment, you've got eyes on them, you know exactly what they're doing. And if something goes wrong or doesn't look right, you detect that immediately and you can stop that action in your environment. Another area that we want to focus on is not allowing your most sensitive credentials to be able to log into a workstation, for example. You want to have dedicated systems that your most sensitive credentials are able to access, and they can be only used on those systems. That's going to allow you to limit that attack surface that you have to be managing and have eyes on so that you can be more successful at detecting quickly when something goes wrong and you have the ability to stop it immediately. Hi, I'm Wendi Whitmore. I'm the Chief Security Intelligence Officer at Palo Alto Networks. And in that role, I'm responsible for bringing our intelligence insights from every product and capabilities that we're building for our clients and bringing those to the forefront so that we can really help provide actionable insights for our clients to take and to protect their environments in the best way possible.